but I try to get the point across to kids, every facet of your life going forward is probably going to be positively affected through that collegiate athletic experience.
I will leave it to CT to do the intro. We are ready to go. We got our coffee.
We're in our cutoff.
And we're in our cutoffs.
You guys look awesome, man. You guys look like you've been living it.
Yeah.
That's the plan. That's the plan. Every day we try to. All right. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Episode 4, Cutoffs and Coffee. CT here along with James, Coach James DiBiasio. Awesome conversation coming up with y'all. Y'all may recognize our guest today from the T3 Speed Summit just a couple years ago. Our guest has over 16 years in the strength and conditioning industry, is the owner of Victory Sports and Performance and the head coach, Victory Sports and Fitness out of State College, Pennsylvania. Awesome guy. We have an awesome conversation lined up. His name, ladies and gentlemen, is Rob Oshinski. Rob, thank you for coming on with us. Have a quick question. Now, if you Google Rob Oshinski, you're going to see a couple pictures, and one of them is one of the toughest pictures I've ever seen as a profile picture for coaching. Rob, are you as tough as you look here?
You better believe it, buddy.
Look at that. Rob,
Pennsylvania coal region all the way.
Yes,
that's terrifying.
That's not even a good one. There's actually one in there somewhere. There's an old profile pic on Facebook where I've got a goatee and it's black and white, and I had all kinds of friends on social media go, dude, you got to get rid of that, man. You got to get rid of that picture. It's scaring me.
I saw that. I said, oh, we got to talk to this guy. Okay, let me tighten it up. Rob, how you doing today? How's everything been?
CT, I'm great. It's great to be here with you guys.
Awesome.
In the midst of the quarantine, right?
Yeah. And how are you guys doing? I know, all gyms are affected, a little differently. How are you guys hanging in there? Are Pennsylvania restrictions any different than Ohio restrictions?
Not really. I mean, we're shut down. We're doing some online stuff. We're doing some virtual training. I'm writing programs for athletes every day. So we're generating a small amount of money, but like most places, we're keeping our fingers crossed. We've been approved for the PPP funding, and as long as that comes through, we should be okay. But these are harrowing times. So I may be coming to Ohio to work for you guys at some point. So leave a job open for me.
Hey, you're always welcome. You are always welcome. That would be a lot of fun coaching with you. But yeah, we're all kind of in the same boat right now, just trying to reach as many people as we can. We've done a lot of live content. Me and CT do speed workouts every morning at 9, where we do a live workout in our living room, just like our athletes are forced to do. Even though we have access, if I wanted to, I could go up to T3, but I'm not doing that because our athletes can't. What out of the kind of content that you've been able to put out have you found to be most successful in reaching with your people and your athletes?
Well, I did a little series on Facebook over a couple of weeks, just some in-home tips, things like how can you on a shoestring budget, what are some things that you can get or utilize around the house? What are some easy ways to address speed training and conditioning, which my go-to in this situation so far has been hill running. Yeah. We haven't put a ton of stuff out. We've been getting a lot of private contacts from our athletes and from the parents. So I've been trying to deal with people on a personal basis as much as I can, which has kept me pretty busy. I'm on the phone a lot throughout the course of the day and into the evening.
Yeah, and I think that personal connection is what I'm missing the most in being with my phone at all times has helped being able to at least maintain those connections that we've built up through our training and with our clients. I'm going to kind of transition here and I have a question that I love to ask. For me as a young strength coach, there was a lot of incoming information. And there was a certain point where like my eyes were just completely opened, like in the Matrix where I took the red pill and I was like, oh man, I think I was doing this wrong, or I had maybe the wrong ideas. And then I kind of had to shift my philosophies to what actual performance training was. And that was introduced to me by our old performance director back when I just started at T3. What were some of the moments that you had in your career? You've been in the game for a long time. You've seen a lot of trends come and go. Was there like a singular moment of a paradigm shift for you, or what were some of those things that you learned along the way that made you change the way you thought?
I'm going to first answer your question and then go a little bit into talking about things as a young strength coach. 100% yes. Back in 1998, I attended Building and Rebuilding a Complete Athlete with Vern Gambetta and Mike Clark. And up to that point, I just had the basic strength and conditioning training that most people had up to that point. I was a CSCS. I had some other personal trainer certifications, but honestly, I listened to Mike and Vern speak that morning, the first morning, and I called my wife up and I said, we've got to refund everybody. We are ripping everybody off. I felt like Mike and Vern were on such another level from where I was at that point in time. It was a challenge. And fortunately, I was blessed to spend, it's kind of a long story, but I got to know Mike, be friends with him, and he invited me to a couple other conferences that came up soon thereafter. And it kind of gave me a jump start, because you guys have probably heard this from guys like Lee Taft and other guys that are more my age. You know, we just didn't have the internet. We didn't have YouTube to access very much at that time. So we were really challenged and restricted to talking with friends on the phone and meeting with those friends wherever we could face to face to learn. And so that was absolutely a pivotal moment for me, because it questioned almost everything I did. Secondly, I would encourage any younger strength coaches that are listening to this that, first of all, what Dr. Bill Kramer told me a long, long time ago is the first step in learning is confusion. So to your point, you got all this info out there. I would expose myself to a lot of it, but I would try to do it under the direction of a mentor. So I think every young strength coach listening to this needs to seek out someone who's been around for a while, who can say, hey, listen, you're checking out stuff from T3 Sports, you're checking out stuff from Lee Taft, you're checking out stuff from this guy or that guy. Those are great decisions. Or, hey, this bro science that's coming from this dude, you may want to be careful. But otherwise, the access to information is incredible. I was just talking to my wife about this the other day. If I had to sit down and create a video curriculum of fantastic stuff to supercharge a young strength coach to a high level of competency, I mean, it's there. You know, YouTube just has video after video after video from people like, I don't care whether it's Louis Simmons or it's Gray Cook or whoever it is. The information's out there to get really competent really fast.
Yeah, and I think that's almost a double-edged sword, and we see this a lot because there's so much information out there. That mentor is going to be the key factor in helping you disseminate what's trash and what's really, like really good strength content and really good conditioning. And, I've taken the time over quarantine to kind of go down the rabbit hole in some of those areas with acceleration, just trying to learn more. And after the first week of doing this, I was more confused than ever. I was like, I don't know if this is how it works. And, we'll talk about it a little bit, but the combine training was specifically what sparked my, attention to that. But there was just so much information out there that, like, I didn't have anybody on my phone that I could call right away to say, hey man, have you heard of this? Is this real? Or like, how are you starting 40s with your guys? But I think, it's definitely, there's so much good information out there, but there's also some stuff that's just out there to be out there.
Yeah, I think one thing real quick, CT, young strength coaches need to be careful of is the tendency to gravitate toward what is new and what looks cool. I think if you sit down with a guy like, I've said his name a couple of times, but a guy like Lee Taft, you understand that there's a big depth of knowledge there, but there's also this realization that, hey, this simplistic mode of progression and methodology works. I mean, if you listen to Joe DeFranco, Joe, how do you develop acceleration? 10-yard dash after sled push, after 10-yard dash after sled push. Yeah, he's working with a lot of elite athletes, but sometimes we can overcomplicate things. and think that the coolest looking thing is the latest and greatest. And sometimes the science just doesn't substantiate it, nor does the anecdotal evidence, the experiential part of it.
Yeah, and thanks to social media for giving us that, right? That's something that James and I talk about all the time. I mean, a lot of our athletes want to come in and they want to do the ladder work and they want to catch the tennis ball and they want to have the blindfold and they want to do all this stuff, and then we just we ask them, at what point on the field are you going to be doing these footwork drills? At what point? I played 10 years of professional football and I never once caught a tennis ball when I came out of a route, right? So it's just, and we also talk about just getting kind of bored with the basics, just having to do the boring basic stuff over and over and over again and mastering that. And that's what's really going to make these players elite. It's not looking for the new cool suit to put on that, helps get your hip into extension and, all these crazy things that you see on social media. And that's something we appreciate you saying that, because that's something that James and I talk about all the time. I do want to know what were a few of those things that you heard in 98. You're talking about Mike and Vern had that seminar and you called your wife and said, hey, this has got to change. What were some of those things that stick out in your mind that they had mentioned?
What the core really is, and that it needs to be trained with a focus on stabilization. What 3 planes of movement are and how they apply to everyday human movement. I mean, I know this is going to sound funny to most people listening to this, but for me, I was 5 years into the field. I had been an assistant strength coach at a Division I school. I didn't know what the transverse plane was. And then when you start talking about realities that you guys and we deal with every day, which is the female ACL, and the reality that 95+% of lower extremity injuries in the United States occur in the transverse plane with a deceleration component, you go, okay, if all I'm doing is putting an athlete on a leg curl and a leg press and doing walking lunges, and that's kind of all we do, there are what we refer to as performance gaps. Mm-hmm. And those were some of the big ones for me. I never thought of my programming from a perspective of a triplanar reality. It was all pound and grind. And I now trust me, I've been to West Side twice. I'm kind of a tool in a toolbox guy. I think that there are a lot of tools and methodologies that can be very valuable to our athletes. But nonetheless, I think if you're going to say, hey, our program addresses injury prevention for the lower extremity and there are no transverse plane components, I don't know how you get there. So for me, those were some big topics that Mike hit on originally. And then just laying the foundation in the discussion of corrective exercise. I mean, at that point in time, I didn't even know that you could really use exercise as a corrective. I had a physiotherapy background and I understood the basic progression of meniscus repair, do a quad set, do a heel slide. But as we know, that's not true functional exercise and true corrective. So it was a life-changing experience for me.
Yeah. And, I think that reminds me of, just an athlete that we have as an Olympic weightlifter. I'm not going to name the school he went to, but he went to a very big D1 Big Ten school, and he never touched a barbell in 4 years of playing fullback at this school. And this is maybe 2-3 years ago. And that blows my mind. But it's still out there, and there's still, coaches that are putting kids on machines at a high, that are high level athletes, and they're just going on machines and running through circuits. And, he graduated, like I said, maybe 2 years ago. So that's still out there, but we definitely know more about how movement relates to injury than ever, and how the body is one piece of equipment that we have to get ready to play. And I wanted to bring up, I remember from the seminar 2 years ago, you did an ankle manipulation to help alleviate high ankle sprains and low ankle sprains. Do you want to explain that a little bit, where you got it and how you've seen it really impact the health? And you've told some incredible stories about kids being able to go play the next day after doing this type of manipulation.
Yeah, so I've got to give some credit where it's due. Dick Hartzell, the rubber band guy, who unfortunately I don't hear a lot about Dick anymore. I'm not sure what he's up to these days. He's out of Ohio, Youngstown area. Dick was the rubber band guy, and I saw him at the Juniata Strength Conference. I don't know, 20 years ago. Yeah, probably 18 to 20 years ago. And Dick is this real outgoing, kind of flamboyant presenter. And he started sharing about this ankle program he does with bands. And having had the physiotherapy background that I had, there was a lot of skepticism. Well, the following year he was presenting again, and my wife had just sprained her ankle. So before his presentation, I said, hey, would you mind taking her through your protocol and let's see what happens? Well, the effects were absolutely dramatic. I mean, she literally felt about 80% better in about 5 to 10 minutes. So we began using his techniques and then tweaking some things on our own. We have to be careful because of scope of practice, but I would say for any PTs, any athletic trainers that are listening to this, you've got to dial in and you've got to learn this methodology, which is essentially you take 2 mini bands. For those of you who may be getting bands from Elite FTS, that's where we get most of our bands from. Typically the red mini bands are set up on both sides of the foot. We take most athletes through 5 movements: plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, inversion, eversion, and circles. And we do an inversion, eversion stretch and a plantar flexion, dorsiflexion stretch. And that's pretty much it. We try to drive high repetitions. If an individual has an acute sprain, you function through a pain-free range of motion. And I'm telling you, the results are absolutely incredible. I'll share one story, and one story that I know the PTs or orthos or whoever maybe watch are going to want to shoot me. But anyway, we had a D1 field hockey player, one of our most committed athletes. This is about 18 years ago. She calls me up in tears on a Saturday, says, Rob, I am so sorry. I haven't been in a workout this week. I sprained my ankle. I've been in therapy. It's not getting better. Is there anything you can do for me? And I said, Maureen, actually, it's kind of out of my scope of practice. I really shouldn't do anything that moves you along. And her dad, who is the head of emergency medicine at our hospital at the time, gets on the phone and says, Rob, it's Bob. Can you help her? She's losing her mind. I said, yeah, there's this technique that we've been working on that has some phenomenal promise, but this is out of scope of practice for me. He said, it's not if you have a doctor's referral. And I hesitated. He goes, she'll be over your house in 10 minutes. Be ready. So she knocks on the door and she comes in, braced, crutches, basically putting next to no weight on the ankle. And I swear to you, within a half hour, she walked out of the house carrying crutches in the brace with the swelling probably at least 50% improved. So typically for us, we get athletes once they've gotten discharged from therapy, or in some cases, a doc is saying, hey, like we have some docs that we train their kids. A doc will come and say, hey, you just do this stuff with us. But that's the foundation. And then we're progressively moving them to closed chain activities, obviously to reestablish proprioceptive function and integrate them back into normal movement.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember that story stuck with me, and that was over two years ago the first time I heard it, and I'm really glad we got to kind of touch on that again, because I think that's incredible. That's definitely something that I would love to get a refresher course on and see you do again. I remember you did it live with us at the summit, and I think that would be something so cool to be able to see again.
Well,
invite me out in the fall and we'll do it.
Yeah, come out here.
Yeah, Rob, real quick, is that something that you're introducing? Maybe, you said it, you have been doing it for a while. Is that something you'll do every training session? Is that something you'll have kids do with, who have pre-existing ankle issues? Is this something that people can start doing, looking into it a little more daily? Kind of where do you stand on that?
So CT, first thing, it's obviously it's a time-intensive activity, so it's difficult to do in a group setting. Mm-hmm. What we will try to do is, if we have a group scenario where we have multiple coaches, if the time works, I may have an intern look over some things, and I may take the athlete and take them through it. But let's look at this through the eyes of but before we got started here, we were talking a little bit about combine training. Let's look at it.
Yeah.
through that perspective. So every combine guy that I've ever worked with, we take them through the initial evaluation and assessment, which includes, and this is just kind of an aside, first MTP evaluation, of which I would estimate at least 50% of them have first MTP restrictions, which can cause problems all the way up the chain, up into contralateral scapular movement. But anyway, we will typically take them through 6 to 10 sessions with the bands. So basically, think of it this way: at the beginning of each lower body session, we are beginning. It's one of our activation exercises. So we're taking them through this protocol every lower body workout for the first 3 to 4 weeks. And basically, because it's an open chain they are open chain exercises, I'm looking at them as there's diminishing returns. So we feel really strongly that they have a tremendous impact initially, but the goal is to get them on their feet as soon as possible. And one story I'll share with you guys that is, if the last story I told you sounds hard to believe, or this whole thing is you're not sure what to do with this, take this one home. I had 2 college basketball players, best friends. Each guy, as crazy as this is going to sound, each guy sprained each ankle every season for 7 seasons in a row.
Ugh.
And I'm not a big brace fan, so they basically told me that listen, we live in braces. We don't do anything without braces. I said, well, if you guys give me a shot, we're gonna get rid of those ankle braces. And they laughed and said, Rob, you're crazy. Like, there's just no way. Well, that was June. Punchline, the following season, each guy played the entire season without ankle braces. Neither guy had a sprain. So, those are 2 of a litany of stories that we have that are just so compelling that it's like you got to give it a shot.
Mm-hmm.
But back to the main question, typically 6 to 10 applications. And then what we do is we rely on the athlete to come back to us and say, hey, maybe CT, I know, you were a receiver and a safety, maybe a receiver we're talking about, maybe he goes and works with his skill guy over the weekend, comes back on Monday and says, Rob, man, my ankles are really tight. Can we go through the band protocol? And we use it kind of prophylactically after that point in time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so we're talking combine now, right? So we'll transition into that a little bit. And you've trained some guys for the NFL Combine and had some success, and that's something that we've been doing over the last couple of years. Kind of talk us through that situation, how you get your guys, what type of guys you get, being in State College, the home of Penn State, they're right down the street. What guys are you looking to train? What guys do you usually train? Do you enjoy that process? Where are you with the whole combine training?
So CT, the whole thing started back in '98. I was an assistant strength coach at Penn State. As a lot of strength coaches do, you develop relationships with guys. And after I left Penn State, I was working for an orthopedic company, and a couple of these guys sought me out and said, we need your help. And over the years, every guy that I've worked with has been either an offensive lineman, a defensive lineman, a linebacker, or a tight end. And that it's kind of the nature of the beast. I was an offensive lineman in college. I've worked offensive line camps, and it's honestly been a word of mouth type of thing. Most of the guys that come to us either know one of the guys that worked with us before, or there's some type of medical relationship. We've had some PTs that just happen to know guys that were prospects and sent them to us. Like, we had a former Notre Dame offensive tackle that played a couple years in the league. He was in PT, and the guy that was his PT was this guy from Harrisburg, which is about an hour and a half south of here, and said, hey, you got to get with Rob. If you're going to make this thing a reality, you guys got to connect. We have had some agent referrals. We had a guy this year for 3 to 4 weeks at the beginning of January. His agent represented a couple guys that we've trained in the past. So really the ideal way to build that is to have an agency that's kind of big, that they're getting guys every year, and they're saying, hey, James, hey, CT, here's our guys for this year. That's the ideal situation. And that's, in some cases there are exclusives out there. So the big shops like in the past, Parisi and Exos and Tom Shaw and Bomarito, those guys, almost all of them have exclusives with one or two agencies, and it helps to keep the coffers full. But for us, it's almost a wait and see. We usually find out whether we're going to get guys sometime mid-December to the beginning of January.
Yeah, and along the process of getting those guys and then starting them into training, how do you prioritize their training? I think one thing that I struggle with is, like, there's so much weight on these tests, but at the same time that takes away from training like a football player to get them ready for when they actually make it. And that's a tough balance. You find yourself managing that balance, or how do you kind of structure your training to make sure that you tap into both of those avenues?
All right. So I'm going to take one step back. First, here's our other reality. I don't know how it's been for you guys. Most of the guys that we've gotten are long shots. So they're guys that are anywhere from a third round pick to a free agent. And I kind of like that, because these guys are usually hungry. There's usually no nonsense. And I think it actually to some degree helps with what you're talking about, because what I tell the guys is the first, whether it's 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 weeks, we are preparing to test. Whatever performance benefits that you derive are ancillary. Because if I have a guy, sorry, man, not a COVID cough, I swear. If I have a guy who everyone is saying this guy's a free agent, well, my job is to wow somebody when he tests, to now maybe make him a 7th or a 6th or a 5th round pick. And we know how that happens in that scenario. You have to create what I call our outliers. So every combine guy that comes to me, we look at his previous testing and we test them initially, and we try to identify 2 or 3 tests that we know they can knock out of the water. So we had a D tackle 2 years from a D2 school, Bloomsbury University. The kid was a 2-time All-American, phenomenal football player. But he was a little over 6 feet tall, and he was 290, but he looked like he was 275. So it was imperative to get a couple tests that were kind of jaw dropping. So we ended up with 32 reps on a bench, and we ended up with a 31-inch vertical. And so with each of those guys, we are trying to improve all the tests, but honestly, we are really trying to target 2 or 3 and put a lot of our eggs in that basket, so that there's something that catches the eye of the scout, and then sometimes even the agent, because some of these guys aren't even they're not even represented, and they need good representation. So sometimes them testing well helps to move that along. But then, James, back to your question, once they've done their pro day or they've done the combine, we're then moving toward prepare to play. And there's a much different focus on the methodology and the structure of the training.
Yeah, I definitely, have those conversations with, one of my guys right now who, he's a stand-up DN, All-American Division III football player, pass rusher, specialist. But we had a conversation where it's like, hey man, we need to lose some serious amount of weight so that your 40 can be a wow factor. It can't be average because you're too small and you might need to play linebacker. So we had those conversations, and it's a tough conversation, because what made him successful at the level he just played at doesn't mean that's going to give him a shot at the next level. And I think one thing that we struggle with at our facility is it's so spread out with who's training for a pro day or a combine, when that combine is, and how many guys do we have this year. So I think that's one challenge that we've built, is because we don't have a steady stream of guys coming in, trying to fit, what they need into our system of how we coach and operate as a business has been difficult and a challenge. But, I hope to see organic growth of our combine training, down the road as we continue to operate in our new building. But it's definitely an interesting time in that athlete's life. Considering what they need to focus on to get them to the next level doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what they did to make them successful at the previous stages of their careers.
Here's one thing I would say, and you guys are former collegiate athletes. You know this. I don't care what the sport is. If you develop a heightened sense of confidence, you are going to be a better athlete. So one of the ways I look at and rationalize our combine breakdown of prepare to test, prepare to play. I know if like couple years back, we had a defensive tackle who at 274 pounds ran a 4.67. His confidence was just off the charts after he started running low 4.7s and high 4.6s because he never thought he'd be able to do that. And that confidence fueled a fire that when we transitioned into prepare to play training, he was just so motivated and so driven that training was essentially heightened. So, I think there's a psychological component to this that we can't downplay. And there is a psychological component that's important for all of us as performance coaches, because we are the day-to-day balance between these young guys, their dream, their parents, their agent, their college coach, and all these people that are feeding them with advice, sometimes good advice, sometimes not good advice, sometimes creating anxiety, sometimes creating anxiety unnecessarily. We tend to be the voice of reason. And I think that's a big part in the process.
Yeah, it's definitely a good point to bring up, and that ties in some of the conversations that we've been having as a staff of our role is that, neutral voice that's steady as she goes, trust the process, kind of support system.
Rob, you brought up a great point about confidence, right? And people talk about swagger all the time now, right? And swagger is not so much, the nice gold cleats or the nice uniforms or the nice phone. It's going through a grind, going through tough times and coming out of it better than you went in, right? Having the confidence to have fear going into a training session. And we've all, I know from the three of us and the places we've been, we've all been waiting to start a training session and being nervous to get into it, right? And being worried about what you have coming up because it's going to be hard, but when you come out, you're going to be better. Are there things that you do specifically to try to, to push your athletes past places that they think they can go? Are there things that you've had success being able to see, when an athlete finishes a training session, oh, I can do this. I will be better. I'm stronger because of it. And they start to develop that confidence and that swagger a little bit more? Or do you think that's just over long-term, just hard work day after day?
I think it depends on the athlete. Sorry. So first thing I would say is we kind of joked about it first, that picture you pulled up of me looking so serious. The reality is I love to have fun and get on here and talk with you guys, and I can smile and laugh and everything, but there is a serious side to me. And what one of the kind of going jokes is amongst our staff or my former athletes is the look. It's the look from Rob. So a lot of times for me, it's not about what I say. It's about this point in a conversation where the athlete is going a place where they shouldn't go, and I don't say a word. I just look at them like, you gotta be kidding me. We've got a job to do. There's something that has to happen here. And for me personally, it ties in. I joked about where I'm from, but I grew up in a blue collar town, in a blue collar family. We kind of laugh and joke about some of the things that I did as an athlete growing up and the lack of facilities. But those experiences and those mindsets affect the way I work with my athletes. So sometimes it's in the moment. Sometimes it's just turning and giving an athlete the look. Sometimes it's putting my arm around and pulling them into my office and saying, hey, listen, tell me what's going on. How do we need to work through this? What's bugging you? So, and that's part of you can't get around the experience of being a coach. I made a lot of mistakes on the way up, a couple really foolish mistakes, even with some elite athletes early in my career, because I had no one mentoring me. I had no one saying, hey, you probably shouldn't handle it that way. But I think motivation, you guys know this. There were coaches that you had that you would have walked through fire for. And there's other coaches that weren't bad people, but they just didn't punch those buttons for you. You know, I can name a really small number of coaches that I've had over the course of my career. One of which is a strength coach, Jeff Connors, who's been at UNC in East Carolina. He was a guy that didn't need to say much to me, but man, he could punch my buttons and excite me and motivate me. And he and I could actually get somewhat confrontational with each other. We could disagree, but at the end of the day, I still had a lot of respect for him and still ended up listening to what he had to say. So I don't know if that's helped to answer your question. I hope it has, but I think it's this. I think it's the reality that as a coach, you have to understand that athlete or someone is paying for every moment you're with them. Mm-hmm. So you need to be in the moment. You can't be thinking about your workout after. You can't be thinking about the video that you're going to watch at lunchtime or the lunch that you're going to have. You need to be focused on them, paying attention to body language and the feedback that they're giving you, because we know that 80% of communication or 90% of communication is body language. So things that are said, unsaid, give you a lot of insight as to how to deal with that athlete at the moment. And a series of moments lead to the elongated process of that relationship.
Yeah, that's great. Just communicating, right? Communication, understanding your athletes, understanding really what your athletes need, not so much what they want, right? I think that'd be another way to say it. You know, you need to go through this. You need to do these things. You need to hear this, to process this. Everybody has a different path. You know, it would take me a while to think about kind of these mentors, these times that I've had some resistance and I've broken through. But you know, it all comes back to, like you said, having a coach, having a person there who's able to kind of lead you towards that place. And we don't know as coaches when that time's going to be either, right? So we've just got, it could be a Monday morning, it could be a Friday afternoon, it could be a text on a Sunday, you know. So that's good, like you mentioned, to just being present and always being there for your athletes. I would love to transition into, you know, when searching you and hearing some of your stuff and reading some of your stuff on the internet, you have a lot of talk about single leg work, single leg training, and that's something that James and I have been pushing for a couple years now. Would love to hear it from you and your perspective, because again, we've kind of talked about it so much that we understand where we stand on it. James might have a little better feeling about where you are on it, but just to kind of let everybody know where you stand on it, again, because you're so passionate. I've read so much about you talking about it. Where do you stand on?
And before you dive in, I mean, I think even just hearing you talk 2 years ago was one of those moments for me where I started reevaluating where I put things in the order of my programs that I was making kids do. So like every kid, you know, for the last 2 years, you show up on Monday, you know, you're getting blasted with some weighted lunges. You're getting challenged by it. And, you know, I did it first for a while, and I put it out there as like, I'm going to see how much I can reverse lunge. I felt phenomenal. I felt faster I think I was 29, then I'm 30 now. I felt faster at 29 than I did at 22. And I was like, where was this? And so, you know, I started incorporating it with my athletes. But I want to hear more, you know, from you. Like I said, 2 years ago, it was another shift for me to evaluate how I'm emphasizing strength exercises. I kind of want to hear more, you know, about where it came from, how you implement it.
So how's that saying go? Necessity is the mother of invention. I think something like that. So for me, first of all, we've already talked about Mike Clark. So we have the Mike Clark moment for me, which Mike at that time talked about single leg strength work and its value. Well, flash forward to some combine guys that I'm now starting to work with. I'm in a physical therapy setting. We don't have a squat rack. And for a lot of strength coaches out there, they go, you know, the squat rack? How can you train an athlete without it? Well, we started doing single leg work and doing a lot of it. And the results were immediate. They were profound. Guys building muscle mass, running great 40s. The first year I was doing combine work was with a guy who was a first team all Big Ten linebacker from Penn State, outside linebacker, ran a 4.5 40 at I think it was a 4.52 at Indianapolis. Had a great vertical, had a great broad. So I was seeing that stuff early on, but that it was some degree of evidence, but I was rational enough to know, hey, I'm dealing with some pretty good guys here genetically. Some of these guys are pretty special. So what is this going to look like with the genetically average athlete at the high school, junior high level that I'm working with? And the reality was unbelievable. So the real, I'm going to tell a story or two if you guys don't mind.
Please.
Please. We got all day.
Yeah.
So
literally
one athlete was is still, I am very close to this guy. I was in his wedding actually two summers ago. And he's now like 31 years old. He was a genetically average guy who was playing football, came to us when he was in 8th or 9th grade. We did exclusively single leg work for 2 years. He did not do a bilateral squatting movement for 2 years. So flash forward, this is June going into his sophomore season. He says, hey, you got to teach me how to squat because I've got to start working out at the school, and they squat at the school. I kid you guys not, he was like 150 pounds at this point in time. Our first squat workout, he did 95 for 10. And it was a little bit of a challenge, but he was able to do it. In 4 weeks, he was doing 205 for 10.
At 150.
At 150.
Wow.
After having never squatted before. And his strength coach at the high school, who was a national class powerlifter, was having him demonstrate the squat movement to the rest of the team, most of which had been training under him for a year, 2 years, 3 years. So now I'm going, whoa, we have a genetically average, maybe slightly above average young guy here. Movement is great. Speed's better. He's developed over time. He actually went from, I think it was a 3-year period of time. He had gained like 50 pounds of body weight. We weren't compromising hypertrophy. So what was the downside of this? So you start asking yourself that question. And for me, I couldn't find a downside. It was implementable. I didn't have to wait for a squat rack. I am probably more concerned than a lot of coaches are about spinal loading. I had a back surgery in college, and it does affect my perspective on the way I prescribe exercise. But for me, I just didn't see a downside. So as I continued to program it and continued to see these results, and then with our combine guys, where, like I said, we did this D-tackle a couple years ago. So stick with me on this story real quick. This kid comes to me having worked with a national class powerlifter in high school for 4 years, then with a Division I strength coach for 4 years. This is a 267-pound All-American defensive tackle who is squatting 435 for 5. Not too exciting, right?
Right.
Like, where did 8 years of well-coached powerlifting, where'd it go? So the natural question had to be, was doing more of the same thing going to produce a different result? Guys, we go into 8 weeks of exclusively single leg work, followed by 2 weeks of bilateral work. Now, I'm not anti-bilateral work by any stretch, but his pro day was coming up. He's got a broad jump and vertical jump, and he's got to start his 40 with a bilateral push, right? You know, I don't know what you guys teach. We teach a 60-40 split in terms of force production on the 40 start. But he is going to have to test with a summated bilateral movement. So what I typically do is, for the last 2 or 3 weeks of combine work, we start integrating bilateral movements back into the equation. Now, for those who love the big lifts and are going to be skeptical about this whole buildup, guys, here's the punchline. Remember, at the beginning of his training, 435 for 5. 10 weeks later, 500 for 5.
With very minimal squatting up until that last.
With 2 weeks of with 4 workouts of bilateral movements. So here's the thing it comes down to, and this is the thing when you get a little older like me. I welcome debate. I welcome you to question, but at some point, if you say I have to bilateral squat all the time, I go, well, then can you validate for me the results that I've gotten?
Yeah.
Like if what I'm doing isn't a good way to do it, then why am I seeing the results that I'm seeing?
Yeah, and I think one thing that I want to kind of ask about is like the intensity and the amount of weight that you start using with those with the lunges and the single leg exercises, because I think that sometimes like people and coaches will put in the assistant work after a squat day, right? So we'll do a clean, we'll do a squat, and then they'll throw into the accessories like, oh, well, we did single leg RDLs, 3 sets of 10 each leg, and we did dumbbell backward lunges, we did 3 sets of 10, using 10, 15-pound dumbbells. I think to me, that's where we kind of miss the mark a little bit, because that's not enough intensity. But I'm again, what are the intensities and the loads that you guys are using with these movements to drive those squat numbers up like that?
So first of all, in our system, single leg movements aren't accessories. They're the core. They're the core lifts. So, one means of progression is, and this is the way most of our combine guys, it ends up, I end up being able to follow this progression with them. So most of them are bigger guys, what I call a hip dominant single leg squat, which is not a pistol squat. Mm-hmm. That is kind of that's the core lift. That's the movement that we're really trying to get to. So we begin with Bulgarian split squats, and the typical loading parameters are, we're going 1 to 2 weeks at 12s, we're going 1 to 2 weeks at 8s, we're going 1 to 2 weeks at 4s. I try to condense that, but it depends on what the strength level is of the guy coming in. So for instance, the linebacker that we were working with this January, we did 1 week of 12s, 1 week of 10s, or I'm sorry, 1 week of 12s, 1 week of 8s, 1 week of 4s. So, when you look at motor unit recruitment, we're clearly moving into totally different recruiting parameters there. But anyway, he made tremendous gains over those first 3 weeks. Then we transitioned him into the hip dominant single leg squat that is the squatting movement that we do most in that scenario. And he did great for 2 weeks until he had to go to his All-Star game. So typically we are following a pretty simple periodized scheme where the microcycles are either 1 to 2 weeks in nature. And James, we talked about this when I was out to see you guys. We know this reality. Practice makes perfect. It doesn't matter whether it's strength training or what it is. You've got to develop technical proficiency. If you can't do a movement well, if I jump right into sets of 4 and 6 and 3 and whatever, unless that athlete is pretty special, I'm not going to get the cleanness of the movement that I'm looking for. And I think this is another one of the principles that guides my programming. The technical limits principle. This was something that I heard from Ian King. I don't know if you guys have seen anything from Ian. He's a strength coach from Australia. Truly one of the great minds in performance training internationally, and has been for 20 plus years. But Ian King has coined a term, the technical limits principle. And I live by this, our coaches live by this. And that is essentially this: the more precise and the more ideal a repetition is, because we all know that each set comes down to the rep, right? The more consistent those repetitions are, the greater the strength response. So if I do a Bulgarian split squat, the reality is, being that it's not a machine-based movement, being that it is a free weight, body weight-based movement, I have the potential for altering knee position. You know, one rep, the knee could be neutral. The next rep, the knee could be in varus. The next rep, the knee could be in valgus. That's possible. And we have potential changes in depth. We even have potential changes in hand position or bar position. But if as the coach, I'm immersed in the moment and I am trying to work out those details, and those reps, the more consistent those reps get, the faster and the stronger that athlete's going to be. Now, I mean faster. We're going to move the strength gains along faster. I really believe this. I think when you're sloppy with movements, I'm not gonna mention the guy's name, but we hung out with a guy who's become a pretty well-known national strength coach a couple of years ago. And after spending the day with him, he does a lot of great stuff. But he said to me, he goes, you know, if there's one thing I think in talking with you guys that where I'm falling short is, I let my athletes get away with too much from a technical perspective. And I think if you really coach up that technical aspect, you're going to get greater output. So that being said, we drive the proficiency in those movements. And when I'm saying single leg is dominating, just as for instance, a typical day in the life of one of our combine guys might be 4 sets of 4 on a single leg squat, followed by 3 sets of 6 on a single leg RDL, followed by a lunge pattern. There may be no bilateral movements in the training at all, aside from if we're doing Olympics. So if he's doing cleans or snatches, obviously there's a bilateral component to it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, tying the Olympic lifts into what you were just talking about with technical proficiency to elicit the most maximum strength gains, you know, Olympic lifts that's it right there too, is like, if you move the bar poorly, you will lift not as much weight as if you lift the bar well. It's very visual. Athletes are able to feel it and express it right away. I've found that athletes kind of pay attention more when I'm coaching that type of style barbell lift, the Olympic lifts. But the same thing applies when we're doing single leg strength exercises with their attention to detail. And, you know, some of the kids that we have lifting incredible amounts of weight in single leg exercises, every rep looks the same. And those are the guys that have been able to push that 300 mark in their lunges. And it's because of how technically proficient they are, they're able to keep loading up safely.
Yeah, I'll share one other story with you guys. We have a guy who's a freshman lineman at Penn State. He's a walk-on, and this kid has actually gotten press because Coach Franklin has told members of the media how well this kid was prepared coming in. So here's the Cliff Notes version of his story. So he starts training with us full time in early November of his senior year of high school. He is a terrible overhead squat. He is a terrible single leg squat. His mobility is awful. You know, we talk about ankle dorsiflexion needing to be somewhere around 12 degrees for most athletes to perform a good squat or even to jump correctly. Well, he was like at 0, like literally at 0. So when I watched him attempt to do a bilateral squat, it was a mess. So we immediately went into single leg protocols. So again, this is November of his senior year of high school. Flash forward to mid-June at Penn State. They do a squat. He has not done a single bilateral squat, not one rep, in 8 months. They do the squat test at Penn State. He squats 395 for 15 reps.
Oof.
And I said, how'd it go? He goes, well, they stopped me. I know I had a couple more in me, but the coach didn't want me to do more than 15. So again, to people who are listening going, I'm going to sacrifice my bilateral movements. I am arguing with you vehemently. You are not. This kid didn't do a bilateral movement for 8 months and broke a bilateral squat PR. He never came close to doing that prior to November of his senior year. And by the way, how did he get to Penn State? This is the coolest part of the story. He's throwing track in the spring of his senior high school season. They run a second heat. They're about to run the second heat of 100. Guys, sorry. He says to the track coach, "Hey, can I jump in?" He is 292 pounds. And the track, he's like, this is one of those kids that everybody loves. The track coach says, "Yeah, man, jump in." He jumps in, he takes second. Somebody videos the 100, puts it up on Twitter, and literally within a couple hours, the whole Penn State staff friends him. And it was either later that night or the next morning, Coach Franklin calls him and says, "How are we going to get you to Penn State?" Because he was committed to Rutgers, and he came to Penn State as a walk-on. And again, I'm trying to paint the picture for people. You are not sacrificing hypertrophy. You are not. By the way, when this kid started in November, he was 265 pounds. He was 292 in April.
Wow.
You're not sacrificing hypertrophy. You're not sacrificing speed, and you're not sacrificing bilateral movements. So what's the downside? I don't know. After doing this for 20 years, I haven't figured it out. It just makes a lot of sense to me. And if you're working with a team, think about how many high school strength coaches may be watching this, and they're going, "We have 3 racks in our weight room, or we have 4 racks in our weight room, and I've got 30 or 40 kids coming in, and it's like a circus to get everybody through." Well, you know what? I can split your team in half. I can take 20 kids into the auxiliary gym. They can do single leg squats while the other half is doing an upper body movement, flip-flop back and forth, get everybody in an hour, and they're going to be just as strong, if not stronger. There's going to be less messing around. You're going to build hypertrophy. You're going to get everything you want, and you're not going to frustrate yourself the way a lot of high school coaches do because of lack of facilities.
Yeah, I think one thing too that I've noticed in the couple of years that we've been re-emphasizing, what our core strength is the athletes that are able to do these single leg exercises with the most amount of weight. One, they're going to go up in their back squats and their front squats. Like, those numbers go up, and we've seen it happen as well with college football programs, like an entire college football program. We've seen that. But you'll also notice that all of a sudden kids are able to produce more force in their Olympic lifts. So like it translates far beyond, their back squat or their, if you're looking at it from just a strength quality, we've seen the same thing. The lunges increase the back squats and the front squats. It doesn't necessarily work the other way around. Just because my back squat, I added 100 pounds to my back squat, that doesn't mean I added 50 pounds to my backward lunge. Those things don't mix, but the other way around does work. And what we've seen too is to me, it's the surprise of like, holy cow, these kids are way more explosive with a barbell. They're able to produce way more force just from the act of getting themselves back up on one leg.
Yep. Yeah, I don't know if you guys have heard this before, but there are almost everything. Well, there's a lot of what we all do that has its foundation in the former Soviet Union. And you guys probably know some guys that are just like, Soviet aficionados, like really, really dig into this stuff. And I have a couple friends that just can't read enough, can't hear enough about the former Soviet systems. Well, all that to say, it's pretty well known that there are some former Soviet coaches who believe, and Soviet Olympic lifting coaches who believe that high box step-ups were critical to late-term improvements in their Olympic lifters. Yeah. So essentially, as accommodation was continuing to occur, and these older athletes were seeing diminishing results in the weight room, almost by chance, some of these Soviet coaches started doing high box step-ups. Now, I can't say to you guys, because there isn't enough research out there to validate movement for movement, but the high box step-up's a squat movement, right? So whether it's that or the hip dominant movement that I prefer, I don't know if it matters so much, but the reality is they were seeing results then, and we see results now. And I think for a lot of coaches, if you just say, there's all these benefits. And there is some research that's really compelling. Like I may have mentioned this, James, when I was in Ohio with you guys. There's an EMG study that's really kind of mind-boggling. They compared leg extension to single leg hip dominant movement, like the one that we prefer. The VMO. Now remember, I just said hip dominant movement. The VMO in that movement is 200% more active than the VMO in a leg extension on a machine. And I think this goes back to where we need to be really cautious as strength professionals, validating the quality of a workout or even a movement based on how it feels. It's not always how much something burns as to how effective it is, because to your point, I mean, if you're doing Olympic lifts, if you're doing singles, doubles, and triples, nothing's burning, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and Rob, a couple more questions. Don't want to take the rest of your day up, and then we'll let you go get some cough drops if you need them. So we've talked about mindset, mentors. Spent a lot of time on single leg work again. James and I could talk to you about that for a couple more hours.
Lunch gang.
Yeah, lunch gang. I always like to ask the question, what are we missing in strength and conditioning, or as strength and conditioning coaches or as athletes? What are we missing that you think people need to start doing more often? And maybe you could even start with a training session this afternoon. What is it that you do that you love doing, that you think that we're missing in strength and conditioning? And again, whether it be a mindset thing, whether it be a specific exercise, what is it are we missing that we could help progress ourselves as coaches just today?
This is probably not going to apply to guys like you guys and other places that are really doing a great comprehensive job with their athletes. But one thing that I feel that I see too much in strength and conditioning circles, whether it's the high school weight room or even at times, to James's point, even in Division I programs, we are still in love with what I call traditional ab exercises. I am just not a fan. Here's the example that I use. If James had a 12-year-old son who was showing great promise as a basketball player, and I was a basketball skills coach, James brings him to me, and I spend an hour having this kid volley tennis balls. James is never coming back again. He's never paying me for the second session, right?
Yeah.
Why don't we respect strength movements to the same degree? And the reality is some strength coaches don't, because if they did, they wouldn't be laying athletes on the ground at the end of a workout and doing a 15 or a 10-minute core circuit, which is nothing more than bicycles, V-ups, isolation movements for the rectus abdominis that we all know tends to overactivate the hip flexors, which creates core dysfunction and detracts from stability versus adding to stability. So all that to be said, I think as a whole in the United States, I would like to see more and more people focusing on functional core stability as one. Number two, some form of evaluation. Again, going back to the Penn State kid that I work with, understand that this is no reflection on his collegiate program, because Coach Gall and Coach Losi and those guys do a phenomenal job at Penn State. But in high school, this kid was squatting significant loads, and his squat technique was horrible because movement was deficient. He just didn't have good movement. He was way too immobile. So I think improving functional mobility is key. Third would be moving away from bodybuilding programs and programs that emphasize fatigue. One of the things I preach to my athletes and their parents, and sometimes this is tough, and I'll be honest, we have lost some kids because of this. The goal of the workout isn't fatigue. The goal of the workout is adaptation. Am I eliciting the strength, power, speed, coordination, whatever my goals are for that workout? Am I eliciting ample responses to move the athlete toward those goals based on what I programmed, or am I just making them tired? Because what any of us could do is I could come out to Ohio right now and, well, maybe not right now, maybe in a couple weeks when I'm back to work, but we could get some kid and we could go to the supermarket and find some guy and say, hey man, we're going to give you $50 if you go over and take this kid through the hardest workout he's ever been through. Well, if he goes to T3, the facility's awesome. He's going to have tons of stuff at his disposal, and I would bet that he could take that kid through a brutal workout.
Yeah.
But is that workout going to elicit the responses that athlete is after in terms of moving him toward greater performance? And I think that is a big, big problem. We have too many kids, high school coaches, even at times collegiate coaches, who it is clear that there is this focus on how tired we are at the end of a session. What I tell my athletes is, hey, if we do a conditioning session, you're not going to like me at the end. And yes, there's going to be a lot of fatigue, but what if speed, strength, and maximal explosion is the goal of the workout? If I get to that level of fatigue, unless it's just with some auxiliaries at the very end, I'm probably selling the kids short. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to get over ourselves and get over this CrossFit mentality. And I am not anti-CrossFit. I'm not saying that in any way, shape, or form. I think CrossFit has done some tremendous things to heighten the awareness of Olympic lifting in this country. I think we as strength coaches owe CrossFit a debt of gratitude from that perspective, because Olympic lifting was, I'm not going to say all but dead, but it was definitely in the background up until CrossFit. Yeah. But CrossFitters do what CrossFitters do. And if that's what you're preparing for, then that's the way you got to train. But if you're preparing to sprint down a basketball court and dunk a basketball, I'm not sure that a WOD is the best way to go.
Yeah, I think, one thing that is helpful is to be able to compartmentalize exercise and training, and that, like, you might need to exercise and run a couple miles to make sure that your cardiovascular system's ready to go play basketball. But that doesn't mean in your training session you're going to be gassed. In your training session, you need to be working on, your ankle stability, your joint integrity, your core strength, and your leg strength. But if that means you can't get that done here, you better be making sure that you're getting your cardio work. And I don't need to stand there while you run 2 miles. That's not what you're paying me for. You're paying me to perform better. And if you can't handle better performance because you're cardiovascularly out of shape, like, I by now should have told you that's what you need to do on your own to help that, so that we're making the most out of our time. And most athletes that are at the elite level do extra work anyway. And those are the kids that are like, hey man, you were kind of huffing and puffing, and those sprints were not meant to be conditioning. I think you need to make sure you spend some time working on your cardio. Like, those conversations with elite athletes are usually well received. But it is tough when somebody's new to strength and conditioning to walk away from a performance training session and not feel utterly gassed, because they might not have that ability to separate those two things out.
It's true. Absolutely.
Rob, so for all the athletes and parents and coaches whose minds are blown right now, and they want to find you on social media, where can we find you?
Victory Sports and Fitness on Facebook, Rob Oshinskie on Facebook, Victory Sports Performance on Twitter and Instagram. And we're trying to get better. We'll have some more content out there. We're trying to do some more stuff with YouTube and whatnot, but maybe we'll collaborate with you guys a little bit and do some things. But people can always reach us with my email is robo@victorynation.com. Our work number is 814-235-7676, and the website is victorynation.com.
Awesome. I'll make sure those links get in the bio. Thank you so much. I do recommend people listening to this check you out on Facebook, because you drop a lot of knowledge bombs on your Facebook platform. I think that's kind of where I've kept in touch with what you've put out there for your athletes the most. So check that out. We'll put all the links in the bio. I'll throw this video up on YouTube and share it with you. That way you can get it out to your peeps. Thank you so much for spending the time. Again, you're one of the coaches that I've been lucky enough to be around and learn from, and I truly believe my athletes have benefited from that. So thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Great hanging out with you.
Hey guys, thanks for joining. I just want to let you know that this podcast went a little bit over. So we added all of the stories that Rob told about his athletes, which are incredible, and you should definitely check out on another YouTube video, which I've attached a link into the explanation of this video. So if you have some extra time, check those stories out. They are incredible. Again, we are so lucky to have Rob on, and we wanted to share the extra content that we were able to get in our conversation. So go ahead, check it out. The link's below. Let us know how you like this video. Again, this was awesome. Thank you so much, Rob. We look forward to more great conversations in the future.